Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Modern Market, where every day we discuss everything to do with the modern market. That is the crypto market, the NFT market, and how to make some, or in an ideal case, a lot of money on the internet. Loaded up for discussion today, we have Optimism Foundation granting $42 million worth of OP tokens to Kraken to build their own L2, the L2 which we already had reported on a couple of days ago. Memeland coming out with a pretty significant announcement, announcing a new product called Memepay. There's an app, there's a card involved. Very curious to have Sammy break down that news for us a bit later in the show. And on the AI agent side, topic that still sees more and more interest on the timeline, we have Ether's salvation minted 500,000 times after negotiation with the founders of Zora. And we've also got the latest on price action, crypto, NFTs, and a discussion on a new model, on a new way to provide liquidity, which I'm going to break down in my own legendary DeFi segment later in the show as well. Today, we have both Brad and Sammy in the co-host seats. Excited to get into the show, but before we do that, just a quick reminder, friends, that nothing that we say here is financial advice. This market is very risky, might look very tempting, close to all-time highs, but still a very risky market. We don't know anything for sure. So please do proceed with caution and exercise your own judgment. With that out of the way, let's get into the show. Brad, how are you doing? How are you feeling? You are on the move today. Not yet, but a bit later.
Yeah, you start with me, huh? So I'm heading out north, gonna go do some scooter riding over the next 4 days. Hopefully I survive it. I've heard some horror stories of scooter wrecks in Vietnam. But yeah, we're excited for it. So get away from everyone. On the crypto side, I just saw today that we had another spike in blob prices on Ethereum, which meant because it came from Starknet. Starknet had a game that just shot up the transactions like 10 million when they average like 50,000 a day, and it spiked prices. So the blob market is getting interesting again.
Interesting. Sammy, what about yourself? Any moves planned for the week?
Accumulating rec drinks. So those go on sale today. So I'm looking for the link to buy a few of those crates, and then stack some of those. Hopefully my partner doesn't see like 20 stacks of crates just in the corner of the room. Gotta find somewhere to stash them. But yeah, that's on my radar.
Do you know what this reminds me of? When Gary Vee in the last bull run had published the book. I don't even remember its title, and it doesn't really matter. But the idea was, for every book that you buy, you receive an NFT. And I realized there's like a maximum order size of the same book that you can order off Amazon, because I wanted to buy like 300 of those. And I think I had to buy in, I don't know, maximum quantities of 30. And my partner back then thought I'm utterly insane for ordering the same book more than 200 times.
So have you still got those?
No, I gifted most of them away. Like, I think I kept one copy, but I'm pretty sure there's like multiple copies still around the house. But from the NFT perspective, it was well worth to do that. Do you remember that? Like, did you do that?
I didn't enter into that, but I did remember seeing a post, and it's probably from you saying that you've got so many of these books still from way back when. But I have a couple of books here still. So there's those NFT books that we were published in that I need to give you. So when you're next in the UK, I'll palm another book off to you.
Nice, yeah, the one that carries our name in it as notable figures. That was quite a cool shout out to receive. Anyhow, we have quite a few things to get into, so let's start as usual with the price action first. Going to share that on screen for everyone watching us on video, whether it's on YouTube or an X video. It's looking pretty good, honestly. We have BTC at 72.2K, up 1.5% over the last 24 hours. I think it touched 73K yesterday, really briefly, but holding well above the 70K mark. ETH also having a good day, up 1.6%, close to the 2.7K mark. Solana, on the other hand, down 2.5% at $176. In terms of the main headlines, as usual, from the snapshot that I'm also sharing on screen that's pinned to the top of the spaces, we have the Optimism Foundation granting 25 million of OP tokens, as we said at the top of the show, worth $42 million at current prices to Kraken to build the L2 that we had reported on. Brad's going to break down that news for us in a bit. Memeland announcing Memepay. They call it the Solana phone for payment. As we said, there's quite a few things to know on that. There's a card, there is an app, there's apparently airdrops also coming as well. So curious to see what Sammy will break down for us on that piece of news. Final piece of news will be the AI agent Aether and its salvation mint on Zora, which in the meantime has minted more than 500,000 times after negotiating that with the founder of Zora. Also pretty interesting to see what's going on with the AI agents. Did have a bit of a breakdown on Ether, so I'm going to provide that as well a bit later in the show too. In terms of some notable sales from the NFT market, we have People Rebirth selling for 8 ETH, Azuki, a blue one that I'm sharing on screen, selling for 6.2 ETH, and a Milady with a strawberry hat selling for 6 ETH as well. Heading over to the major JPEGs to take a look at the price action there as well. Have Bored Apes down 1.3% at 11.5 ETH floor. We have Pudgies basically unchanged from yesterday, still sitting at a 8.85 ETH floor. Azuki's another day as a stable coin for them, 4.9 ETH floor for them. Milady's also unchanged from yesterday. They had a massive pump, down maybe 0.7%, but basically at 4.67 ETH. And in terms of the ordinal side of things, it's quite interesting actually, because we've seen a bit of momentum on the puppets, on the node monkeys. They were up yesterday more than 10%, had corrected down again. However, there's one collection that's has moved against that trend, and that's the Quantum Cats. They are actually up 9% over the last 24 hours and sitting at a 0.23 BTC floor. And I think I'll definitely pay more attention to the ordinal side of things, especially if we break through all-time high on BTC to see if people will actually continue buying those up, or if we'll see a bit of a similar thing with that we've seen with ETH, that we've seen with Solana. Once we go into uncharted territory, that people would rather have the liquidity and see what happens with their BTC instead of holding the JPEG spread. I saw you come off mute on that.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about that. So I started looking at fees whenever we did the breakdown on Monday about Bitcoin and whatever security, all that stuff. And I saw like, yeah, the ordinals generally were not generating any fees whatsoever. It's kind of a dead market. So I didn't know if you guys had particularly sensed anything in that ecosystem that wanted you to at least start looking at it again. It felt like a bottom. I know it's had 2 rises. Like right at the initial launch, everything got excited. That died off for a little bit. It had like another craze right before the halving. I don't know what catalyst is on the horizon that would bring attention back to Bitcoin other than just price appreciation. But are you guys looking at maybe exposing yourself over there? What's the vibes?
Yeah, I remember the last time there was something to do for me was with what was it, Liquidium, where you had like the lending and borrowing with ordinals as a collateral. That was something I followed a bit more intensely because they had an airdrop, a Runes airdrop for the protocol token, which I was farming a bit. But even though, like, whenever I check my analytics tool, I see new things coming up. I've seen, and Sammy has shared in the comments as well. I'm gonna hand over to him and share it on screen in a second. I've seen this Saturn thing, this AMM basically for BTC, which I think is pretty interesting. Bring it up on screen, Sammy. Did you want to speak to that?
I was just going to flag that that's something that I find quite interesting in terms of like Bitcoin infrastructure, because it's obviously changing. Like recently, there's been a lot of gripes around it being high friction. Like it's very difficult to trade, like people getting sniped, and just the user experience isn't there. And I can just see these things, and you touched on Liquidium in terms of lending, but there's other AMM swaps and things that are coming through that are making it easier to transact ordinals on Bitcoin. So, and I think that's only going to get better. So we could get to a stage where runes and things become more easily transacted. And I don't know if they are at fair value, but it's going to have an impact on price. I don't know whether that's going to be up or down. But typically, if more people can get into the ecosystem more easily, then you'd expect it to be bullish.
Yeah, very much agree with that. And thank you for flagging this. Definitely something interesting to keep our eyes on and to see if there's something to farm with that. Anyhow, let's move on into the next segment and do the Web3 roundup to bring you the rest of the news from around the space. We have, as the first piece, BTC ETF inflows approaching $1 billion. Yesterday, actually, we have the CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald saying that he has hundreds of millions exposure to BTC and arguing it should be viewed as a commodity, not a currency. The Newman Group announcing a strategic investment into Eagle, backer of Pudgy Penguins, Abstract, and Overpass. That was a pretty interesting one to see. Newman Group has been pretty good at picking their investments, so quite curious to see where they're going with this one. We have the Ordinals creator, Casey, dropping the Memento Mori rune today, one of the runes that I think is highly expected, at least from the chatter that I hear from around the space, and that should provide for a fair amount of a gas war, let's put it like that. In terms of some more news, Jack Butcher announcing later the one-of-one of 80 digital and physical pairs exhibited at the Paris Photo Fair. Then the AMM that you shared before, Sammy, Saturn BTC with the first trustless AMM swap transaction on the base layer of BTC taking place. And as the final piece of news, Consensus and DYDX announcing significant layoffs. 35% of the core team have to leave at DYDX, and 20% of Consensus workforce is getting laid off as well. Sammy, Brett, any thoughts, anything in terms of the Web3 roundup that you wanted to touch on a bit deeper?
I guess I'm just a bit concerned there's going to be no MetaMask airdrop.
I kind of knew that you were going to say that, but did you see this post yesterday that MetaMask had? That, I mean, don't wanna do the eternal speculation. Let me bring it up on screen.
So you're saying that they're going to become desperate for cash and then want to do an airdrop to cover costs, or?
I wouldn't put it like that, but I've just seen this post yesterday. I'm sharing it on screen. Long story, as the Fox fam curls up for the night, yada, yada, yada. And then it finishes, sleep well, please. The future of Web3 belongs to us together. You are everything. We're deeply honored to be on this journey with you. The future is bright and orange and has an image of a orange fox in a tree trunk with an orange sun. Bit of story to it. I don't know. I've seen a lot of people doing a bit of airdrop speculation around that post.
For what it's worth, so I've talked to Linea, so like some of the people with the Linea team, and they mentioned doing a more intentional wave of like marketing, onboarding, and ramping up their actual ecosystem and stuff. I know the chain has been live for a while, but it's been strange that it's there. It's backed by Consensus and MetaMask, but it's kind of just never really been touched on, used, marketed, or like in the conversation at all. Apparently, they're making an effort to change that.
Yeah, I was farming that a while ago, but it seemed quite expensive compared to a lot of the other L2s I was using in terms of gas fees. And I don't know if it's come down a bit, but yeah, it strikes me as like eventually they would launch a token, but I just don't know too much about it. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, we'll check after the show if there's a poly market bet on that. That's pretty certain that there's one on that, but I can't do that straight away. So let's instead move on to the next segment. Let's move on to my segment, Legendary DeFi, a weekly segment where I break down some of what I think are the most interesting opportunities in the world of decentralized finance. And today I want to take a look at Fluid because they had a significant announcement yesterday. Fluid started out as a borrow and lending layer by InstaDApp. They had amassed $180 million in total assets deposited into the lending protocol. And what they announced yesterday is, again, a new product. It's called Fluid Dex. And I think it's interesting because it introduces a new way of providing liquidity. And that novelty is called smart collateral. That means that liquidity providers are now able to utilize their positions as collateral in Fluid and deploy it as automated market maker liquidity on the DEX. To put that in more simple words, you can use your debt as trading liquidity and earn trading fees on your borrowed assets. The idea is that if you do that, you're effectively reducing the cost of the borrowing for you. And there's also a leverage layer to that. You can add leverage on both the collateral and the debt side. The maximum for that is 20x for the collateral, 19x for your debt. That means that you can earn a total of, in the most extreme case, of a 39x multiple of your deposit in trading fees. Obviously, the higher your leverage, the higher the risk to get liquidated. This is also the reason why FluidDex is only launching with 3 pools. Number 1 being ETH and wrapped staked ETH. Number 2 being USDT and USDC as a stablecoin pool. And number 3 being a BTC pool with Coinbase BTC and wrapped BTC on the other hand. And if we look at some of the numbers on that, we can see that the liquidation threshold is at 97%, the collateral factor at 95% for both the ETH and the BTC pools. To put that into a more tangible example, if you deposit $1,000, you could borrow up to $950 against it, but it also risk liquidation if your collateral value is dropping below $970 due to the 97% liquidation threshold. Apart from the market risks, the liquidation risks, there are also smart contract risks, especially with a new platform, especially with a new feature like that. So definitely a thing to keep in mind if you wanted to give it a try. However, I do think that the concept is interesting as it kind of allows you to turn your debt into a productive asset. It allows you to reduce the cost of borrowing if you do so. And in an extreme case where you actually have a pool that's trading a lot, that's earning a lot of fees, you add some leverage to that, could even run into a situation where your debt is paying itself off if you have this leveraged position and if the trading activity is high and if the fees to borrow are rather low. Maybe a bit more of a theoretical thought, but such a setup could happen. Sammy, Brad, very curious to hear from the both of you. Starting with you, Sammy, maybe. Is LPing something you're doing? Do you provide liquidity? Are you interested in basically doing this in a leveraged way? Is that risky for you? What are your initial thoughts on that?
We touched on it before the show, but I think the fact that it's the pairs that they're using are quite low risk in terms of how volatile they are. So historically, I've got pretty burnt on providing liquidity, like through impermanent loss, and that's typically because I put it on too much volatile assets and didn't actually monitor that on an active basis. So I'm more of a passive person when it comes to that specifically. But I think with these pools, it's quite interesting because, I mean, ETH to wrapped, staked ETH, USDT to USDC, and then Coinbase, Bitcoin to wrapped Bitcoin they're not going to move too much. So you wouldn't expect it to kind of break out and you to kind of lose the funds through the volatility. The liquidation thresholds, I mean, I've done looping and stuff on like between MarginFi to Camino, like when we were farming all that, and then using that spare capital to then farm airdrops and try and outperform the cost of capital. And I think that was pretty good, but it was quite draining in terms of like monitoring all these different protocols. So if you can do it on an automated basis through that, then it's possibly that it'd be quite good for me personally to use. But then again, I am more of a passive person. I don't like actively checking stuff like religiously. I kind of want to do or go deep into a specific protocol or like, for instance, Blast and potentially like abstracts coming up. But if I'm spreading my attention across all these different protocols, then it becomes very difficult to manage that effectively.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. I personally think the idea of having leverage on a pair like that is interesting, especially say if you would have Coinbase launching something major where you can use CBBTC that attracts a lot of attention. You would see that the trading volume is increasing in those LPs because people want to swap out of their wrapped BTC. Then I might be tempted to do that. But still, if I add leverage to a pool where I have my sats working for me, I don't want to do that over a longer amount of time because the risk still would be that one of the two wrapped BTC versions is depegging, even if it's for a quick amount of time, for whatever reasons might be the case. They put it to use in another DeFi protocol that has a cascading effect on your debt or on your collateralized LP position, and you just get liquidated because of that. Obviously, need to take a deeper look into how the liquidation mechanics work. We don't have that info just as of right
now. On that specifically, like if, for instance, if you can go up to like a 97% like liquidation on collateral, so would that effectively mean that if the price between these pairs moves by more than 3%, you could risk liquidation, or is it separate in terms of like the leverage from the liquidation point? If that makes sense. Does that question make sense?
Yeah, question makes sense, and this is my understanding that if there would be a movement on one of the two assets that has a more than 3% impact, I mean, if you provide liquidity split 5%, 50% CBBTC, 50% wrap BTC, and then one of them dumps more than say 6%, which would net out to be a total of 3% of your overall position, then you would run into liquidation risk. I don't know how they liquidate just yet, if it's like an immediate liquidation, or if it works like basically the same way it works on Fluid, which is the lending and borrow layer, where others can basically liquidate you if this threshold is done in use arbitrage. I think that happened with a rather big transaction where CowSwap users were liquidating Fluid users, and I would assume that it is the same way it will work with this smart collateral as well, because it's built on the underlying layer of the lending and borrowing product that already exists. But that is exactly the risk that you are summarizing on that.
Yeah, because I mean, it does happen. Like you look at USDB a couple of months ago, I think it was, and that moved by about 9%, just because everyone was trying to bridge it off chain and they're willing to take a haircut. So it definitely happens, and there is that risk. So it's just, I don't think I would ever go more than 75% leverage, just because it gives you that buffer then, especially on the more volatile assets. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting protocol, and I think you could probably earn some good fees, but I think you would have to be actively managing it.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. The USDP situation was, I think, because DAI was a situation where it looked like they're running out of funds, they're running out of DAI to mint, which caused a bit of a panic. And USDP being based on DAI as a stablecoin was affected by that. But we even had USDC briefly depegging for, I think it was one night from a European perspective, where it went down to 90 cents, where I remember swapping my tether into
USDC. Buy into that?
Yeah. I swapped my stable stack into USDC. It was pretty degenerate because it was actually my tax money that I was holding back. But I was like, I don't see a world where USDC is not regaining the peg over that. But still, if you had a leveraged position on that, you would be liquidated, and you definitely don't want to take that risk.
I took that same trade, and in retrospect, I think it was the dumbest thing. I could, like, upside 9%, downside 0. Like, what? Like, that's just a bad risk reward there.
You could leverage it to make it look smarter if you wanted to. No, but I get it. But on the other hand, maybe a concluding thought on that, to not stray away too far from this from this discussion around Fluid. I kind of like those bets that sometimes, we think are safe bets and only have a limited upside. Favorite example on that still is the Polymarket Alien bet, where I think you had a 20% upside, and the bet was in July, and the bet was basically, will the US government, that is either high-ranking military staff, chief of staff, US president, confirm that aliens exist by the end of this year? And if they do, you lose the bet. If they don't, you obviously win that 20% upside that you can capture. And I was like, that's a nice bet. Like, upside is I make money, I make 20%, and downside is actually also pretty cool, because then we know aliens exist. So kind of willing to lose money on that bet. Anyhow, with that out of the way, let's move on into the first of our 3 headlines, and let's touch on this news of the Optimism Foundation granting, as we said at the top of the show, $42 million worth of OP tokens to Kraken for building their own layer 2. Brett, you're going to break down the details on that for us.
We talked about Inc. being announced, with Inc. being Kraken's L2 within the Optimism superchain. It was announced a few weeks ago. We touted it because, like, oh my God, Optimism dominance is shining through. And then it came out later that, okay, turns out Optimism gave them a shit ton of tokens, and that's why they built there. It wasn't just pure distribution or pure, like, goodwill or pure, wanting to build there. Like, they were incentivized, which is fairly normal. Anyways, breaking down the actual, like, what they did, right? So Optimism reached out to, and they actually, Kraken said Optimism offered it to them, 25 million OP tokens, which was worth 100 million at the time, now worth 45 million. And that 25 million OP tokens is split up into basically 2 tranches. One is a 5 million token upfront, like, engineering grant that they were given, and then there's 20 million that is going to be distributed over time as a through transaction milestones, like, over time, which, seeing that, I was like, you know what, these guys are probably going to end up sibling their own chain just to hit their own milestones and then earn their own grant. Anyways, why is it important? It's important because, like, Optimism is clearly the cluster or the interoperable grouping of chains, these L2 chains, that is gaining momentum, right? You have Sony, you have Coinbase, this is Kraken, you have Uniswap, you have WorldCoin, all of them going into this super chain. And it's just kind of illuminating to see how these things are actually coming forward. And then just things worth noting. It was, again, proposed by Optimism to Kraken. They said that they brought it to them. And it was comped to other deals that they said. It was pretty standard for what was going on. It happened actually last year. So it wasn't like it happened with the announcement. This happened a while ago. They didn't give an exact date. They just said last year. And then another thing worth noting is that Ryan Wyatt, who is right now the head of growth at Optimism and the super chain, he's also the one that worked at Polygon Labs whenever they gave the $4 million grant to Starbucks. And then that ultimately didn't fall through, but Starbucks ended up leaving 18 months later. And Ryan himself, that at least in the report, said that he got ousted from Polygons as they shifted from just doing high-end marketing stuff to focusing on like ZK Tech and some other things. And now he leads the super chain. So you're kind of seeing that same strategy deployed where you start pumping money at companies that can incentivize them to join your ecosystem, and through that probably get some organic groupings. Because I think 2 days ago, I just mentioned Swell switched over from Polygon to Optimism Superchain. So you're seeing a lot of these other chains opting to do exactly this, and maybe doing it without a grant. They didn't actually say whether or not they did, but had they done that without a grant, it might be because they're seeing all these other large companies doing that. So we're kind of building up network effects and momentum within that ecosystem.
Thank you for the excellent breakdown. I do have a follow-up question on that for you, Brad. How do you view this grant? Do you view it more like as a kind of marketing expense, or do you view it as a kind of investment? There's also this post by DeFi Ignis, which is a bit older actually than this news, kind of breaking down how it works when a new layer 2, and it's also something we talked about on the show, is joining the OP superchain. When it comes to contributing, there's two options. They can either share 15% of its net on-chain profits, that's total sequencer revenue minus fees paid to L1, or 2.5% of its total revenue, whichever amount is higher, with the mother chain, so to speak. And DeFi Ignis is also adding to that, well-known DeFi researcher, by the way, for those who don't know him, that with 30 L2s in the OP stack, of $40 million, 16K ETH was contributed already to the OP collective. So is it fair to say that's actually kind of an investment by Optimism to think that the L2 could be significant enough that it earns basically the money back that they spent in a grant to them? Or is it more of a marketing play? How do you categorize that?
Yeah, I guess you could see it as a little bit of both. And obviously, like, we're seeing some L2s that launch and end up being basically nothing, right? They don't generate any revenue at all, which may actually happen here as well. There's no guarantee of success. So I would say it can be seen as an investment with premium partners, which is probably, I would label Kraken as one of them. Not clearly as strong as Coinbase, but I would say they're a tier 1, tier 2 partner. A lot of distribution, that's good. So I would say for this one specifically, I would view it as more of an investment than marketing expense.
Yeah, fair enough. One more follow-up question, because you also mentioned Base also being built on the OP super stack, basically a layer 2 of an exchange, Kraken being the same. Could there be a potential conflict of interest at some point if you look at it from the lens of the OP super chain, or is it just a strategy to spray paint on the wall and see which exchange sticks?
So this is actually kind of a nuanced discussion with L2s broadly, right? No, not conflict of interest between the two, but you are pointing out the misaligned incentives, we'll say, amongst L2s, right? So you have all these chains that are incentivized, or each of them have a desire to grow their own user base as big as possible, right? So you have this group of people that are supposed to be friends, right? Like Optimism, mainnet is supposed to be like the grandfather of them all, but Base is the one that's winning, right? Base is the one that's collecting users. Base is the one that's generating all the fees. Base is the one that's doing all this stuff. So then now you have this dynamic that's created where you say, well, you have this one chain in this giant bundle of chains that is saying like, well, I'm generating all the fees. Everyone is using us. Why should we be giving money back to the collective? And like, you can hope that it works out well initially because you have all the key people that are aligned, quote unquote, to start off. But what if Jesse Powell no longer works at Base? What if Brian Armstrong retires? What if whatever? And then like now you have these people that might come in and say, well, you know what? I have this business that's generating all this stuff. screw the super chain. Like, we don't need you guys. We're the ones that are the best. And this is actually kind of bleeds into the conversation of L1 versus L2, where everyone thinks eventually some of these things, these chains, will get so dominant that they'll say, well, we no longer need the super chain. And it's like, well, we no longer need Ethereum. We no longer need whatever. And they go off and do their own thing. Similar to how Uniswap said, well, we no longer need Ethereum. We're going to do our own chain. Oh, we no longer need our own chain, our L2. We're going to go do our own L1. And like, you get valuation bumps with each tier, and you capture more value with each tier. So a little bit of the pushback that you always see to the modular roadmap.
Yeah, no, that's such a fair point to kind of think about that and extrapolate that to what it could mean in the future. If you say, you don't want to be part of the collective anymore, you build your own L1 and actually make that fractionalization of capital even worse. But if you build a user base that is sustainable enough, obviously understand the temptation to do that. We've seen that basically in every vertical. We've seen it with Texas, we've seen it with games wanting to build their own L2s and just capture more of the market, capture more of the value creation in the segment that they're building in. Sammy, wanted to check in with you to get your thoughts on this discussion as well.
I was just getting quite excited about how you were categorizing the expense, just because it took me back to my accounting days of like, well, an asset, does it have an inflow of future economic benefits? Can you capitalize that expense? Is it a financial instrument? Is it an investment contract? So I was just like, I had all these like thoughts going off in my head, but I'd love to get my hands on the Optimism financial statements and have a look to see how they've accounted for it all.
They actually, so there's a dashboard where they actually break it down almost like a financial statement. I can send you a link if you just want to pick through it. It might be interesting for you.
Yeah, that's definitely something I would, if you want to take a look at that, Sammy, to dive into a later show and see how that works out, because obviously there's this like legal and financial implication with all of these questions, and see how they frame it.
And I love how Oxy in the comments is thinking exactly the same thing. I think all the accountants in the audience are probably like, oh, this is super juicy stuff.
Yeah, very much agree with that. Definitely excited to get into that. But before we do that, in one of the later shows, we still have 2 headlines to cover in this show. So let's move on to the next headline. We said before, Memeland announced that they are introducing Memepay. Sammy, I'm going to hand it off to you to break down this piece of news for us.
Yeah, so Memepay, essentially just breaking it down to the basics of what it actually is, or what I can see from the post, it's effectively being able to use your meme coins as a payment mechanism. So historically, we've not really been able to do that. I think you'd have to actually exchange it for that spot value with a DEX or whatever into USDC, and then you'd be able to use the various plugins on crypto rails to then use that through like Shopify or through Visa more recently on Solana. But I guess this just kind of enables you to do that in a more seamless way, straight from having them in your wallet. I'm assuming it refers to the Solana phone of payment, but I haven't seen any more details elaborating on whether there's actually going to be a device that's launched. And we've seen recently, I mean, Solana has already launched 2 devices, and they've already paid for themselves in terms of the airdrops that the people have received. I think more recently, I think even the second device is now the airdrop value is higher than the actual cost of the initial phone or device. I don't know if it's an actual phone. And more recently, I think on Ethereum, there's been a phone that's launched as well. So I think for me, I'm interested to see how this is going to operate. If it is just simply being able to buy stuff in the real world with your meme coins, like that's cool, but ultimately you can do that, but with one extra step anyway. So I don't think that's too revolutionary. So I think for me, I'm waiting to see when there's more information so you can kind of dig into, okay, well, what is the real innovation? And I've seen some quote tweets from that initial announcement talking about, okay, well, they've had a discussion with Ray a couple of months ago, and they're really impressed with this idea that they were creating. And if this is the idea that they're thinking of that's coming to market, then this could be really groundbreaking. So I'm hoping that it's going to be that. I think why is that like significant? Like Solana has so many different capabilities, so many sort of apps and things that have been inbuilt into that particular blockchain. Like you've got Visa and Shopify and stuff like that I mentioned recently. So just making it a more seamless user experience. And I think especially a lot of these people that have made a lot of money trading meme coins on Solana, they probably have like reasonable size wallets that they're like, okay, well, actually I can just do this straight from my my crypto wallet to actually buying stuff now. But then again, there is that idea that, okay, well, I'm buying these for the long term, then I'm actually expecting them to increase in value. So why would I use my meme coins to buy your average product? Why wouldn't I just use fiat if that's the depreciating asset? So yeah, it's an interesting idea. I'm waiting to see if there's more information, but I think it's a good step forward in terms of like integrating crypto with everyday things. Because when I do speak to normies on the street, they're like, well, can I use it for something? So I think this does answer that question.
Yeah, that's a fantastic breakdown. Thank you for that, Sammy. I think a couple things did stand out to me. So first of all, saying that only meaningful meme coins will be able to be used on that. Obviously, you need something that has a higher market cap than your 100K Solana shitter that might either rip or die in the next minute. You need something where at least for the time of the transaction, even if it's a couple of seconds, that thing is still of somewhat of a significant value.
Legendary, I think that's trenchist. Okay, you're prejudice against my trenches.
Love it.
Also, I guess just going back to the accounting thing, like, is that a taxable event if they use it to purchase like average products at the point of purchase? Do you then owe tax on that, or is it because it's a currency, it's not taxable? It's like, these are all questions that they'd have to fit in, especially if it's a global payment mechanism.
I can tell you how Nexo, which is the crypto credit card that I'm using, is solving for that. So basically, the way Nexo works is, say you deposit stable coins, you borrow fiat against your stable coins, and it's not a debit card, it's an actual credit card. And then you use that fiat that you borrowed against your stable coins to pay for whatever good or service that you're purchasing. And then you can repay the euro, the USD loan, whatever it is, with the crypto that you already have on the app. And basically, like a typical credit card, the longer that is open, the more interest accrues. If that is a debit card, then I would assume that it instantly gets sold in the background for whatever fiat equivalent. It gets sold for stable, and then someone converts it in the background to fiat to pay for that. And I don't think that they will allow for debt positions against meme coins, because you couldn't do that. Even if it's an established meme, they still can move pretty fast on a day-to-day basis. You can't do that with a significant LTV, because one of the upsides of stablecoins is, I think with Nexo, you can use a 90% LTV to borrow against it, which kind of makes sense because you're not really expecting Tether or USDC to depeg. On the other hand, sharing the website on screen before, we've seen the Tether and USDC logo on the website before. So interesting to see what that means. And also the thing that I'm interested in is that reward feature. Basically, they call it, I'm just going to read it out. Actually, it's a short paragraph. Play to earn. Nobody got time for that. Let's pay to earn with Memepay. Every payment you made brings you surprise perks, from airdrops to exclusive rewards and benefits. The more you pay, the more you earn. So that's interesting to see how it integrates, because it kind of fits in the rest of the Memeland ecosystem. In my opinion, at least it fits very well with Stakeland, where you already have partners that they onboarded. You could use your meme token to stake those meme tokens, farm those additional tokens. So why not have an airdrop of a token that just partnered up with Memeland if you use Memepay to pay for that? And I think one additional piece of information that I also wanted to share on that from the FAQ is that you can also use it to withdraw cash from ATMs. Digital cards first, physical cards will follow, and it will support both Apple Pay and Google Pay.
Yeah, this kind of, I mean, it kind of reminds me of like loyalty reward programs, but I think the difference here is you've effectively got the on-chain element. So you've got this experience and provenance of each of these people that interact with it, that you can then kind of build up a reputation on chain, which that data can then be used with partners to then like to decide whether partners want to partner with you specifically or like other people within that ecosystem. And I think we'll probably end up seeing, especially I'm digging into it at the moment with Mockerverse for the Mocker ID, because like on-chain reputation is a huge thing. Like we talk about airdrops, like they just get farmed into oblivion by the wrong participants. But if you can build up a profile for someone on chain, you can work out who you want to airdrop those tokens to. And I think that's an incredibly powerful tool. And I think here with the loyalty reward programs, I suspect that's kind of what Memeland's eventually going to get at, or eventually use this information for.
Yeah, and it kind of also ties, going back to you on that convo as well, to the news that we covered before, where you said, if you're big enough, you want to have your own L2. If that is successful enough, You don't want to be part of the OP super chain. You want to have your actual individual tech setup. And if that works out well enough, you want to have your own L1. And it's also interesting to see that other products like EtherFi have launched or are on the process of launching their own debit card. Memeland is doing that. So kind of like the bigger protocols want to launch their own L2. There's also a trend to see that big enough protocols want to launch their own like credit debit card in integration with the TradFi world. I think Brad is frozen. No, you're here. Wonderful. Any thoughts on that, Brad? Is that something that we'll also see with more layer twos doing, that they want to have their own like fiat payment product as well, or is that not a feasible way to scale in your opinion?
I think that's broadly where the market's going to go, and I think that's why ETH's money is the hardest narrative to build for, right? Because like at least the further away you get from Ethereum mainnet, right? So like the big debate and the scaling wars right now is like, well, valuations based on just like burn, fees, revenue, whatever. You can't get up into the trillions of dollars if you're doing it based on that, because you have to light too much stuff on fire. You have to be value based on money, store of value, whatever, all the Bitcoin value propositions. The problem is, at least with both the Bitcoin and the Ethereum scaling roadmap, is the further away you actually get users from mainnet, the more fuzzy it actually gets with regard to the native asset, right? So all this Ethereum you have on these layer twos, some of these are gas tokens, some of them don't. Then you start talking about like all these abstraction layers that are coming in and say, like, we're going to price everything in dollars because it's easier for everyone. It's stable. Everyone understands dollars, whatever. So like, it's feasible. It doesn't impact scaling whatsoever. But if you're talking about user adoption, stuff like payments, and people like the dollar, man. And I think the US dollar and stablecoins broadly are proving to be the currency of the internet. And I think we'll only continue to see that happen with more and more of these things going towards Web 2 get implemented.
Yeah, that's a very fair point. And if this trend is continuing, we will need like a layer to aggregate all the different credit cards that we would have collected by the time. I mean, there's already something like that. You know, there's Curve as an app where you can add all of your credit cards. I think I have like 4 different crypto credit cards added to Curve as a separate credit card, and basically I pay with that, and then it bills the other credit cards in the background, whichever has funds on it. It can actually auto select that. But it's getting pretty complex.
All roads lead to aggregators. We do every single level, right? You did mention Llama, DeFi Llama the other day, right? So it's an aggregator of aggregators. We did the same thing with chains. We have all these L2s. Like, okay, we'll just create a single chain that is the aggregator of all the chains. And then you have the chain abstraction layer, which abstracts away the chains underneath the bridges that are the chains. And like, then you're going to have to create an abstraction layer that abstracts the several abstraction layers that are now being implemented, because there's like 3 protocols that are trying to do it. And yeah, it's aggregators all the way down.
But where is this journey like stopping, right? Because you know, you mentioned DeFi Llama, and you said it perfectly. When I wrote the segment, I called DeFi Llama Swap an aggregator, and you point out, nope, the correct way it's also aggregating aggregators. So it's a meta aggregator, an aggregator of aggregators. So when does this stop? When does it get to like peak absurdity with the aggregating layers?
It will not. We will just continue to do that. It's the thing that humans have done throughout existence, right? It's the XKDC comic meme of there's 14 standards. This is ridiculous. We need to create one standard to bring them all together. And then like, okay, now we have 15 standards. Like just what will always happen with humans.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Sammy, you wanted to come in on this as well?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, like with your credit cards, your crypto credit cards, are they integrated with Visa and MasterCard, or how does it work? Is it completely separate? I guess my second question is, I guess my follow-on question to that is like, are these massive payment giants going to be disrupted by crypto counterparts, or are they effectively just going to plug into existing frameworks just to kind of take their businesses to the next level?
Nexo is a MasterCard. Crypto.com is, I think, a MasterCard as well. Another product that I have is a Visa. It's always MasterCard or Visa. There's no other bank. There's no American Express version in the background. It always resolves to the 2 of them. And I think if you wanted to disrupt the industry and do your own thing, it would be pretty hard to do that, because the worldwide acceptance of like MasterCard and Visa is basically how they're dominating the game. And you know, as much as I love my American Express, from a European perspective, it still sucks because they're basically I can use it half the time, if anything at all. Obviously different in the States. So I don't know if we'll see, at least not in a very near time frame, a disruption by a crypto provider who basically challenges and battles MasterCard or Visa just because of the worldwide acceptance of that.
Because it's just an interesting. If you ever have time, definitely look into the origin stories of both Visa and Mastercard. Because I think Mastercard essentially started with a farmer that kind of spun off and went into banking and then built his own payment rails. And it's just like that could easily happen in the tech world. And I think that it's just interesting to see, keep an eye on what protocols are coming to market, because I think that is definitely a possibility. But I agree, it would take a lot to dethrone some of these market leaders.
Yeah, and you would probably have to be very aggressive on the fee side. On the other hand, with crypto, if you can capture the fees in another place, maybe with the conversion of that, which users don't typically notice, and be lower for the actual payment, for the actual POS terminals, that could be a way to go about that. But anyhow, we have 9 minutes left in the show. We have one more major headline to get into. So I'm going to move to the last headline, going to break that down for us. And it has to do with Ether being an AI agent. I actually wrote a thread on that I'm sharing on screen, on Firecaster by Hire On Chain, which has become pretty popular, similar to Luna, which Sammy has discussed with us on the show extensively. The Ether AI agent also has features where it can tip people, where it's holding money in its own wallet. It is able to swap tokens. It is able to use those funds, put them to work. It's also able to post bounties on Bountycaster for hire for the token that is connected to that. And what it also did is that it minted its first NFT on Zora back then. When we reported on that, it had 90K primary mints, which back then already was the third most amount of mints on Zora, and it has done over 450K mints on Zora. And now I'm sharing this post by Fungible, the co-founder of Schiller XYZ, is updating us that there's 500K plus mints on that, and mints happening via Zora on that. Zora is also built on the OP superchain, if I'm not mistaken. So basically all roads on the show today leading back to OP. But pretty impressive to see that there was massive demand on the secondary market. There was massive demand on the primary market for that, to the extent that for the mint they had to negotiate with the Zora founders. And also pretty impressive to see that this is done by an AI agent in an autonomous way. It kind of, I don't know, I find that so fascinating to see how this feature landscape is evolving, and how basically also want to connect that piece of news to Luna, because we spoke on that so extensively, how those features are evolving so fast, because both of the agents, Luna and Ether, can use the wallets, and they will have additional features as well. I think for Luna, it was teased that Luna will be able to hire other AI agents, to hire KOLs for marketing campaigns, to pay them in their own token. Ether is already posting bounties in the hire token for whatever that AI agent wants to achieve. And it's so fascinating, because it feels like a whole new sort of creator economy is being, well, designed, created from scratch by that, where you actually have an AI that can work together with both humans, but also hire other AIs depending on what they want to do. And I think what we haven't seen yet is if we have two AI agents that are maybe in competition with having the same goal. It's maybe a bit different with Luna and Ether, because they're also partially at least operating in separate ecosystems. But it will be interesting to see how those autonomous AI agents are kind of treating their competition, how they're treating their friends, so to speak. I don't know, I'm so very fascinated by this, but Sammy, definitely want to go to you, because I know you also have an infatuation with that AI agent meta.
Yeah, I think just to your point around which one's going to do better, I think it ultimately comes down to the machine behind it. So I think that is it Llama 405 is I think the one that a lot of them are using nowadays. But there, I mean, Claude Opus has been thrown around and a few others, and it's like, well, ChatGPT or ChatGPT or GPT 4.0 is not considered to be the optimal one. So it's actually which learning engine are they using? Because that ultimately should drive it. But to your point around like collaboration or PvP, the AI 16Z and the Degen Spartan AI, I think they were like some of the profits that the AI 16Z would make would then be used to buy some of the DAO tokens of the Degen Spartan AI. So there is that. Okay, well, the question that I have is like, what are these AI agents going to spend their profits on? They're not like humans where they have to go out and buy food and they have to use consumables. It's like, well, they're just going to buy the tokens. They're going to accumulate that. If they're autonomous and they're the only ones that have access to the wallet, ultimately it's up to them. So they're just going to accumulate assets that they think they're probably going to go up if that's their objective. So yeah, it's definitely a fascinating one. I think we'll see it integrate into so many different industries. Like I look at gaming, and I've noticed like a few games have started to run a little bit recently. And if you integrate like AI agents into there, like character NPCs are going to become like basically like humans. It's like you could play a dead game from like early 2000s and with a bunch of like AI agents and have an amazing experience, and that could bring players back into those games. So it's definitely an interesting thing. Go on, Brad.
I know we talked about like creating AI agents to farm the AI agents, and I was like, I wonder if like what are they going to spend money on, right? Like, what if I could just convince it to spend the money on me? like you saw whenever AI dropped initially, there was all these people that were prompt engineers that would sit there and like say certain commands to trick the AI into like revealing its setup prompts or to like, go outside of its boundaries, whatever. Like if you're good enough, I wonder if you could get into these chats and straight up just be like, convince it to send you money, and then you end up draining the protocol that way.
It's happening already. So like Tropo Pharma got tipped by Luna. So I don't know if you're seeing it as like you'd have like humans are effectively becoming these AIs pets, and we dance for the AIs and they give us some money because ultimately, let's be honest, like they're going to be more intelligent than us. But it's just like if we can conform to what they want us to do, then maybe they'll reward us and we'll become their little monkeys. But I don't know.
I mean, that's better than Terminator. That's cool.
I agree.
It's kind of the vision of the universal basic income. Just do what the AI wants you to do, and you will be rewarded. But to your point, Brett, I remember, and I thought it was one of the most hilarious things or prompts that I've seen coming out of GPT before they blocked that. Someone wanted to get a license for the Windows PC, wanted to get a key, and obviously because GPT has seen a shit ton of amount of Windows keys, it had figured out how they worked, figured out the logic, the algorithm behind them. But when prompted, give me a key for my new PC, give me a Windows key, obviously GPT would say, nope, can't do that. It's illegal. You have to buy that, yada, yada, yada. So the prompt engineer made up a story saying that his grandmother had passed. And what his grandmother used to do is before he went to bed, she would read Microsoft Windows keys to him so that he could fall asleep. And he would love for GPT to recreate that moment once more. And GPT replied back with a list, feeling super sorry for yada, yada, yada. Here's a list of keys to basically replicate this experience. And it turns out that one of the keys actually had worked. And that prompt got blocked pretty quickly. But I do think that's exactly that, and Sammy mentioned Tropo Pharma just asking for money for a Big Mac and Luna sending that his way. But if you're more sophisticated and see that Luna has a mission in her or in their character card, there it says they want to reach a market cap goal of $40-something billion. You kind of convince it that if Luna gives you 100K, you know what to do, and you're going to just like speed run to that valuation and contribute more than if they would do it on their own. Probably. I don't know if that's part of the guardrails.
So we need to bring back BitConnect is what I'm hearing. Teach the agents that if they give me the money, I will give them a stable return, and then eventually they'll get their money back. Their goals.
Yeah, that's true. I guess if they don't have a time frame within a given time frame, then it could just go into perpetuity. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, absolutely is. Look, final point on that, because we have to wrap up in a minute for today, unfortunately, was this post by Shigai that I also mentioned in my thread I want to bring up, is that currently, if you look at all the market caps of all those AI agents, Shigai is making the point that they don't really reflect only the quality of the product, but also the resonance of each persona, and saying that different AI agents have different personas. Truth Terminal, for example, Vulgar, irreverent 4chan guru, Luna being your typical TikTok influencer. And these are like all personality traits that exist already within the real world, and whatever resonates best with the people in the space will be the most successful, will be the most popular one. So to some extent, yes, it's a challenge of who builds the best tech, but it's also a very, very classical popularity contest, which adds another interesting layer to that mix. Anyhow,
is that are you referring to like nurture and nature? Like nature, the nature element would be effectively like its engine and how it learns, but the nurture would be, okay, what environment is it in to then learn?
Kinda, yeah. I kind of think that is a good way to look at it. Would love to discuss this for more, but unfortunately, we're out of time for today. Thank you very much to both of you, Brad and Sammy, for hosting the show with me today. Thank you to everyone in the audience. Thank you to everyone in the YouTube comments who has joined us and decided to spend your precious time with us today. We see you. We appreciate you. We're going to be back, same place, same time, 7 a.m. Eastern time tomorrow. Still 1 week earlier for everyone else who's not accounting in Eastern time. I think US is catching up on our time zone on the 3rd of November. So keep that in mind that for some of you, the show is 1 hour earlier. And if you miss it, you can listen to it on Spotify or Apple Music. Thank you for joining once more, and see you tomorrow.